How's it going, everyone? I am Dylan. This is my cousin Carlo, and this is All You Can Board. And today we're doing another episode of our new gamer journey series, but we're doing it a little bit differently. The first episode, we had our patrons vote on what the starting game was going to be and what the ending game is going to be, with the idea being how challenging in many ways can they make it for us to connect these two games with 3 games between them if we were introducing a brand new gamer to the hobby and wanted to get them to that end goal from that starting game. Today we're going to do it just a little bit differently. We have an ending game that was voted on by our patrons, which is Agricola this time, which is kind of fitting because the last one was Feast for Odin.
Yeah.
But the starting game was not voted on. It's going to be different for each of us. So it's just going to be how do we get a new gamer to Agricola with 4 games before them, so you have 5 games total. At the end, after you've watched this video, we'd love to hear from you in the comments. Let us know which format you like better, the one we did in the first episode or this one, because that's kind of how we're going to do it going forward based on the feedback we receive.
Yeah,
so,
and if you're looking for the other video, if you haven't seen it, it was from Carcassonne to A Feast for Odin.
Yes, correct. All right, so I'm not going to waste any more time. This is the new gamer journey. Carlo's going to take us through his first, the 4 games he chose to get a brand new gamer to Agricola if they had never played any other board games before.
All right, so the first thing I'll say is that the goal I had in mind here was that Agricola is it's considered a strategy game, but there are a lot of tactical decisions along the way. You look at the board, you have your cards or whatever, and you're trying to make a plan for the game, but you can't just stubbornly stick to it. You have to be able to adapt on the fly. So I was trying to pick games that gave you a bit of that, even as a brand new gamer, someone who can try to come up with a strategy and start small with a smaller game like that, but then still be able to work their way up to Agricola eventually. So yeah, I'll get right into the first game here. The first one that I would start with would be Parks.
Oh.
So this is something I've actually only played on Board Game Arena. I've only played the digital version. It's not quite worker placement, I don't think, but I think it teaches some of the basics and similarities to worker placement because you have this kind of path, this track that you're going on from left to right, and you have 2 workers that start at one end, and you're basically hiking along this trail along with the other players, and you're kind of leapfrogging each other, going to spaces, and normally you can't go to a space where someone else already is, which is something that I really like about the worker placement in Agricola, is you can't just double up on a spot. There's a bunch of the spots that are unique. In Parks, you have this campfire token that basically you can go to a spot where another player is once, and then you loot, your campfire token flips over to the other side. Your fire gets extinguished, and then when one of your hikers gets to the end of the route, your campfire token refreshes and flips back over, and now your second hiker that has fallen behind can go on someone's space again. So it's a little bit forgiving in the sense that it's not going to completely punish you the way Agricola does, but it is still teaching you that in general you're not going to be able to always rely on going where other players are. So I really like that aspect. It's 2 workers right from the start, similar to Agricola, and the whole game is pretty much gathering resources and then spending those resources on visiting parks to score points. So similar thing to Agricola, you're gathering resources and saving them up and just trying to decide what to spend them on later for more points and that kind of thing. And there's a bit of the long-term strategy because in Parks you start with a card that is basically going to say how you're going to score points at the end of the game, different from the other players and that kind of thing. Right. So yeah, lots of cool stuff there, and I think it's a pretty good entry-level game that teaches a lot of the basics that you'll see in Agricola without directly being worker placement.
Yeah, I haven't played Parks, so I can't comment a lot on this, but it's an interest. That's not where I thought you were going to start. I didn't have a game in mind, but it's just an interesting starting game, and we're both going to have, I think, very different paths based on what you've done here. So
cool. Okay, cool. Great. I'm glad to hear, because last time we had more decent amount of overlap, obviously.
Yeah.
So then, and I'll just mention quickly, I checked up the weight on BGG for these. So Parks comes in at 2.15 on the weight scale. So then from Parks, I think the next place to go to would be Stone Age, which has a BGG complexity of 2.47. So this is a game that I actually only recently tried for the first time as well, again, on Board Game Arena. This is one that I believe you used to own and got rid of. So Stone Age it's not like the first worker placement game, but it's often seen as one of the more entry-level kind of starting points for worker placement.
Kind of like Dominion with deck builders in a way.
Exactly. It's very, very basic in the sense that you're just collecting resources, spending them on, buying cards that give you points and things. There isn't a big complex, card system like in Agricola or whatever. It's a lot more simplified, but one thing I do like that this teaches you that's kind of the next step above Parks is that you can gain more workers throughout the game.
Yep.
And you also have to feed your workers. So you're managing this idea of not only can I gain more workers, but when do I want to gain the workers, and can I afford to feed them, and where's my food going to come from? And there are some spots like the resource gathering spots where there's tons of spaces where you can double up with other players, but the grow your workers spot, there's only one place.
Yeah.
The agriculture level increase thing, gaining tools and that kind of stuff. So there's a bit of that kind of trying to decide yes, I could go here, but if I go here instead, it's going to really hurt my opponent. So there's some of that stuff that you see in Agricola, the blocking and that kind of thing. And I just like the fact that it's kind of like a pretty entry-level worker placement where you can, again, increase your workers, and the whole having to feed your workers, I think, is the most crucial part of this that you really need for Agricola.
Yeah, it's one I definitely considered for mine, and actually had it on the short list a few times. Didn't end up included on mine, and that's mostly just because it's been so long since I owned it that I just didn't remember enough about it to be able to. I even forgot that you like had to do feeding of your workers and stuff. So that's the main reason I didn't include it. I will say, but even though this game, getting to Agricola specifically, is always going to have moments like this. This might be a bit of a tough jump for some people to go like their second board game they're ever going to play is going to be a worker placement game. I guess it's no matter what you're going to be jumping. Worker placements can sometimes be a hard thing to grasp in general, but so maybe you pick the easiest one here. But I'm just thinking like I want to get into board games and you play Parks and then you play Stone Age the very next time. No matter what, there's going to be moments like that, and mine has them too, where it's like, this might be a hard jump, or it's going to take us a couple plays to get it.
Especially because, and here's the thing, if we weren't working up to a punishing, unforgiving, tight game like Agricola, I probably wouldn't have picked Stone Age. But it's because of the fact that, like, if you're going to want to play Agricola, and that's really what the end goal is, you got to learn the suffering of losing points from letting you're not being able to feed your family members and stuff early on. But I agree, like, the starting games here are definitely a step up from the starting games in our last video. Like, last time starting with Carcassonne, like Parks is a much more complex game than Carcassonne when it comes to the rules.
Yeah, for sure.
But I just found it tough. Like, I don't know many more like even simpler worker placement games. Like, I know there's like Mintworks and
like
stuff.
Everdell could arguably be more approachable, but it might not be the best one to get you towards Agricola. It just introduce you to the worker placement.
Exactly. I briefly considered Everdell, but even with the changing seasons and stuff, I don't know. It seemed like Stone Age seemed like a more appropriate place, especially with the feeding your workers. Even though it's unforgiving, it just feels like it has more shared DNA with Agricola.
Thematically too, it does.
Yeah.
Good pick.
Thank you. So then, and just to be clear, of these 5 games, Stone Age is the one I enjoy the least. Like, probably by far, I would say. Like, the other games I think are much better games. But, anyway. So then we'd go from Stone Age into Nusfjord. So this is a BGG complexity of 2.86. So I knew I wanted to have at least one other Uwe Rosenberg game as a lead-up to Agricola, and I briefly considered Nusfjord being the next, like the 4th game, going right from Nusfjord to Agricola. And the 5th, we'll talk about the 4th game in a second, which feels like almost a step back in terms of complexity, but there's a reason for it. But Nusfjord, of all of his kind of like tight worker placement games, this is the one that to me feels the most similar. And when I played Nusfjord, I right away had that same feeling of Agricola, where like most of the things you want to do in the game, there's only one action space to go to it. You can't go where another player is. You don't have cards, like a starting hand of cards like Agricola, but you have the buildings that are out on the board that you have to kind of form a strategy of which buildings am I going to try and get, what kind of synergies am I going to try to go for, that kind of thing. Obviously, there's no animal breeding. You're not getting any new workers. You're not, I guess there's a bit of feeding, right? There's the fish with the elders and stuff, but you're not feeding your workers. So it's a little bit different, but I think that having Stone Age gives you that kind of, idea of like, again, having to create a food engine for your workers and stuff. But Nusfjord has a bit more of that long-term strategy and the really tight worker placement stuff going on. But yeah, it plays a lot quicker than Agricola, and because it doesn't have the overwhelming, like I have a hand of 14 cards, 7 occupations and minor improvements like Agricola, I think it's a bit more manageable, and because it plays in like 45 minutes to an hour, you can play it solo and get used to it. So I think Nusfjord would be a really good next step after Stone Age, and would just, give you the feel of what an Uwe Rosenberg punishing worker placement game will feel like. Yeah,
I totally agree. I think that is out of many Uwe games, that's the one that has specifically to Agricola the most natural progression, because like you can say a game like Caverna, we haven't played it, but a game like Caverna is very similar to Agricola, but I wouldn't necessarily say like you're playing Agricola or Caverna to get to the other. It's almost like you're playing one of those instead of the other.
Exactly.
Whereas Nusfjord seems like it's something you're like progressing on the way. In the same way the Glass Road could fit that bill for other games that have certain mechanics. It's a more like approachable version of a game like that. But,
for sure.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Cool, and then, so the next one we go up to, again, and this is where the increase in BGG complexity stops. We're going from 2.86 on Nusfjord down to a 2.61 for Res Arcana. And this was one that came as, like, it was almost like a light bulb moment that went off in my head where I realized how good of a pick this would be, but I almost didn't even think of it at first, because normally I would never think that Res Arcana really shares much DNA with Agricola, but when I looked at the games I had, I thought, what is missing here? And what's missing is the emphasis on the cards. And Agricola, like, the difference between, fumbling your way through a game of Agricola, technically, like, you could play by the right rules, you could get through it and get like 15 points or whatever, but you're not going to maybe have a great experience with it. The way to actually get from just getting through a game of Agricola to actually like playing Agricola well is the cards. Shout out to Game Brain Podcast, who recently did an episode on Agricola with one of the like highest ranked players in the world, and they talked about the fact that in Agricola, if you didn't have cards at all and you just had the board, the most points you could possibly get just maximizing your board would be, I think, like 36. But people win Agricola with like 50, 60 points. That just shows how much of it comes from the cards that you get and the major improvements that you buy and stuff. And that's why I have Res Arcana here for two reasons. One is that you get 8 cards at the start of the game in Res Arcana, and you're never getting any additional, you're not drawing new cards. Like that, those are your cards for the game, and you have to plan a strategy with those cards. Obviously, in Res Arcana, you can actually discard those cards to like gain resources and do other things, whereas in Agricola, you don't discard them. If you're not going to play them, they just stay in your hand unplayed. But there's still that idea of you look at your hand and you try and think, what's my like combo, where are my synergies going to be for this game? What's my game plan? Which of these are high priority to get out early games so that I can take advantage of them for as long as I possibly can? Which ones are maybe I play them middle of the game if I can, but if not, I'm okay with not, focusing on these. What am I doing in conjunction with what's on the board, like the places of power that are available and that kind of thing? So there's that aspect of the planning with the cards, but the next level of it is the draft.
Right.
Well, this is something you could also get from something like Terraforming Mars, but to me, Res Arcana seemed like the more natural step. So there aren't many games I can think of other than these 3 I mentioned, Agricola, Res Arcana, Terraforming Mars, where you're actually drafting the cards before the game itself starts. And obviously this is an optional variant in all these games, but in my opinion, it's the best way to play Agricola, and I think Race for the Galaxy, Res Arcana gives you that drafting cards to form your hand so that you also have an idea what cards your opponents have, which might affect what strategy you go for or which places you're going on the board in Agricola, knowing what is going to be basically blocking your opponents. So the Res Arcana, again, it's not worker placement. There's a lot of stuff it doesn't share, but it does have the resource management and conversion type stuff like Agricola, but it's basically the focus on the cards that I think you had all the building blocks, but you needed the cards, and that's what Res Arcana does to get you ready for Agricola.
The only thing
to play it competently. Yeah,
and the only thing I'll add here is what's interesting is that the more I've played Res Arcana, the more I can appreciate playing it without a draft. And I still think I like it more with the draft, but I've played it a bunch of times without the draft, and trying to make something out of nothing is fun in that game, and it doesn't bother me as much if someone else gets more luck in Res Arcana, whereas I could see it bother me way more in Agricola if someone just got a whole set of great cards and I got a bunch of trash and I couldn't make anything out of it, because Agricola is already punishing and longer than Res Arcana in its own right, that like having that be the way your game starts for such a long and like grueling experience already is probably not ideal. So
for sure,
that's the only difference I would say there. But the fact they both have popular draft variants is a really good call.
Yeah, the one thing I would say, Res Arcana is definitely more forgiving in that sense, and I agree with you that Agricola would be harder to see someone get a bunch of cards that combine well together, because if I don't have cards that synergize, I can't do anything else with those cards. They're just lost causes. Whereas in Res Arcana, I can say, sure, I'll build my engine with these 2 cards, and the other ones I'll just discard, and I can at least gain resources that'll feed into my engine elsewhere. So yeah, there's definitely a bit of a difference there, but so that's mine. So just a quick recap: start with Parks, then go into Stone Age, Nusfjord, Res Arcana, and then you're ready for Agricola.
That's okay. You have a very interesting path and very different, which is great.
Yeah, awesome. I was expecting 1 or 2 overlaps, but
we'll see.
We'll see. But
okay, so my starting game might seem a little bit interesting too, but I have some really compelling reasons, I think.
I'll be the judge of that.
Yeah, I would start with Santorini, and the reason I would start with Santorini, one, it's a 2-player only game, so it's really easy for someone who's getting into board games for the very first time to start with something that they don't have to worry about a bunch of other players at the table yet. You can focus on just one person. 2, Santorini can be really punishing depending on which god powers come out, and so you're learning just a little bit with this game so far that like a game can have a lot of like me doing something to directly block you. So even though I'm not taking action space, something I do by placing something, by trapping one of your workers or whatever, can make you go like, man, that was mean. And suddenly you're learning in an easier setting with just one other person how mean a game can be without it being like too punishing from the start. And then 3, I was struggling a lot with my picks to find a way, and Res Arcana is a good call on that, to incorporate cards and really show that. And this is one way I found from the get-go that we could call back to after, saying, hey, look how much Santorini changes from game to game depending which cards you play. And the fact you're going to play, you're not just going to sit down and play one game of Santorini. You might do a best of 3, things like that. Right. You're going to see a lot of them, so you might say, hey, this game was so much different than this game just because of what card I had, which then I can easily call back and say, hey, when you play Agricola, every game is going to feel different based on what cards you have. Remember when we played Santorini, you have that, this is going to take that to the next level, and there's going to be more complexity with it. But they're learning that right from the get-go how much a game can change from play to play based on a card just being different.
Yeah, fair enough.
So I really wanted to start with a two-player game because I didn't want to start super small in terms of like, oh, we're going to start with like Fox and Fours or something. Like I wanted to start with a slightly more complex game, but I felt like doing a two-player game is a good way to do that because they don't have to worry about a bunch of other players around the table.
Right.
It's one other person you're worrying about. But again, it's just starting to delve into the meanness. And for me, I should have said I focus a lot of my games here on preparing someone for the brutality of Agricola.
Yeah. But more than the mechanics or the mechanisms themselves, it was more important to just be ready for the mentality of playing Agricola.
To me, if I'm taking a new gamer and I'm wanting to get them, or they're interested in getting up to Agricola, you have to be okay with that brutality, because otherwise there's a chance that you could get to Agricola and be like, man, I don't like board games, they're so mean. So you got to find a way to like really teach them the novelty of it, and all of a sudden, and also that, hey, there's other ways that it can be not as mean but still have that player interaction. So the Agricola doesn't push them away by being too mean, right? So a lot of what I did was kind of incorporated with that. So
and you're not worried that someone would then get to Agricola and be like, but I want to play something more like Santorini, like.
No, that's what I hope happens. Yeah, man.
Yeah, you don't want this play.
That's part of my secret ploy here. And then I could say, oh yeah, they didn't laugh at you. You just wait. I got a game for you. And we're gonna start with Carcassonne, and we're gonna catch it. Okay, so that was
one quick thing I want to say, but that I really like about the pick is that both games have a version where like you can play Santorini without the god powers as like a stepping stone, and then introduce the god powers. And Agricola even says the family variant is without the occupation and minor improvement cards. You just play the game to learn the worker placement, and then you add in the cards. So I like how you could do that with Santorini first, and then you could also do that when you get to Agricola to ease someone in as well. So.
And I will quickly say I have introduced Santorini to someone on a date as their first game, and it worked as a first game. So that convinced me that it could be a starting game. But they did comment on the fact that like it was very like, because I had played it too already and they hadn't, that it was very like, I'm going to do something that directly makes the situation bad for you. So it is kind of a cool introduction to that to make people understand that can happen in games.
And so how did that person enjoy Agricola eventually?
Well, never happened. My next game, I kind of thought about putting this one as the first game for a while, but I have reasons why I didn't. Next game is Arboretum. So this is
what is going on here?
So this is me taking the meanness to the very next level, and also by showing them like, you know, board games can be mean even when you don't think they're going to be mean. Like the theme has no way to let you know that you're going to get into a very mean experience.
Fair enough. No one thinks medieval farming is going to be mean and cutthroat or trees. Yeah,
exactly. And this doesn't have like variable, you know, card powers, but it's still, you know, incorporating cards in some way, and it's still inviting the theme enough that hopefully it's going to get them over that barrier that this is a mean game. And I would be playing this with not two. So this is now the step up to 3 or 4 players. Okay. So you've taken it from a 2-player game to a 3 or 4-player game that's mean. So you have the meanness of a 2-player game.
Very stressful game too.
Yes,
like
to prepare you for the stress. Because again, I was so stressed the first time I played Agricola. That's why I am kind of going with this thing, because I'm thinking of what turned me off from Agricola the first time compared to what I enjoy about it now.
It's interesting that we're coming at the list from very different ways because of our sort of experience and history with Agricola.
Yeah, so like for me, it was so important to be like, I need to prepare them for that in as nice way as possible. And that's why both my first 2 games, and on the next games, it's there, but it's less. These first 2 games specifically focus hard on that in different ways, and that still incorporate things that will be brought back when they get to Agricola.
Right.
So a lot of my choice for Arboretum was that specifically because it is one of the meaner, easier to introduce card games. But there is also some rules complexity there that you complete, like with like how you block players and holding cards back in your hand, that I think even though it's not worker placement, will make people think outside the box a little bit when they get to Agricola, saying how can I accomplish what I want to accomplish with the action take, but also block my opponent and take things at key times. Right?
Priorities. Arboretum. Do you keep a card that's going to score you points potentially in the game, or do you keep a card that you know is going to deny your opponent? And that's basically the heart of Agricola is what's better for me versus denying my opponent. So.
So that
I did not expect either of these picks, but they both make sense, especially because it's not for necessarily mechanical reasons, but just like the mentality of playing these punishing games. Yeah, fair enough.
So that's Arboretum. This one's also going to surprise you for sure, and I think I have good reasons on this one. And the next one's Imhotep. So Imhotep still keeps the meanness, but goes down a step from Arboretum. Not like nearly as mean a game, but now we get into specifically blocking people on spaces. Imhotep, you are constantly blocking people on spaces, and there's only you're putting blocks onto boats, and sure you can block people there. But what I'm specifically thinking of is when you move boats, there is so much meanness in just I will move this boat at an inopportune time just because I know you've loaded up that boat to be optimized here. So I'm just going to move a boat and block here. And once you do that, I can't go to that space with the way I want. It's gone. And in Agricola, there's been times even in the online game we're playing now where it's like I want to go to this space and it's my turn. I'm like, oh, it's already been taken. So now I've just got to hope I can get it in the future. Right.
Or you know what else is the two move? If you think 2 moves ahead, Agricola, you're like, hey, I want to build a room so that I can then build a family member. You build the room action, someone goes to family member. Now you can't grow your family this round. Similar to Imhotep, you want to get cubes on the boat, but then someone moves a boat somewhere you don't want it. So you can never. It feels like you're never in control of what you want to do in Imhotep.
So it's still mean. Not quite as mean as Arboretum, but it without being a worker placement game, like in the same vein as Agricola, it's still teaching you of spaces being blocked and limited spaces as well, which at the start of an Agricola game, there's limited spaces and it just kind of gets wider from there. So to me, it was like, how can I continue to stay entry level and yet continue to teach them pieces that are going to apply to both my last 2 picks, specifically Agricola, to get them there and feel more comfortable with it. So I don't know. I thought they were all a little outside the box, but kind of made sense.
Yeah, no, you've justified them well. I'm very shocked by it. These are games I didn't even consider for my list, but I'm like, oh yeah, it makes sense. The reasoning, checks out.
My 4th game, I don't think will surprise you, and is a crossover. So this is Nusfjord.
Okay, that's the one I was expecting.
This one to me makes the most sense out of every Uwe game I could think of. And I knew I wanted to have another Uwe game here to teach them his style. It might be a bit of a leap to go from, I guess I wasn't viewing it as going from Imhotep to Nusfjord. I was really thinking of the first 3 as a package, where you're going, because all 3 aren't that different in complexity of the first 3 games I chose. So you're kind of going from the combination of Santorini, Arboretum, and Imhotep. Those 3 are preparing you specifically for the jump to Nusfjord. And then Nusfjord is going to basically teach you that you have limited workers, because in Agricola you start with 2, and in most games I've played, I think I got to 4 once, but generally I've had like 3 workers and had to just be okay with that. Nusfjord gives you 3 workers, limited spaces, fighting for those spaces. Like in the same vein that you were just saying, I go to a spot, whether it be to do with the stocks or whatever, thinking there's kind of 2 spaces I want to go, but I have to go to one first. And when I go to the first one, you end up taking the second one, and it kind of locks me out of it. The battle for fish and how that, like, even though it's different from Agricola, it kind of ties into the feeding, like you were saying, and just like that has that Uwe feel that Agricola is like ripe with. That I think it's just there's no real other Uwe game that we've played that is the most natural step to Agricola specifically. If you want to actually have there be like an increasing complexity.
Step up. Exactly. If we haven't played Caverna or Le Havre yet, those might be more similar games, but they wouldn't be a step up to Agricola.
So I don't have a lot more to say about Nusfjord because you covered a lot of it there, but that to me is like the most natural progression to go to Agricola. And then of course we get to Agricola. So again, I framed my entire list based on I need to prepare someone for the punishing nature of Agricola in as introductory way as possible, while still teaching them mechanics. And I maybe I didn't teach them worker placement early enough, or maybe I taught them the cards too early, but not like how. Even though Santorini has these varying cards, it's different. Like you get a single power, whereas in Agricola, it's something that can shape your entire choices,
and Santorini, whether it was on a card or just something else, wouldn't really matter. But yeah.
So it's a different approach. But again, I feel like with both of our lists, they'd be ready for Agricola, and there might be one aspect that they're not quite as prepared for, but we've definitely prepared them in different ways for what they're coming to expect. If anything...
the people I'm preparing might be blindsided by how harsh it is, but they might be more familiar with the mechanisms, whereas yours, they're ready to suffer. They just don't have as much experience with worker placement or whatever.
Exactly. Right? The gameplay, they're going to have to wrap their head around a little bit more. So that's mine. And I love that ours are very different, because I'm going to ask the question, let us know in the comments which path you would either be taught better if this was introduced to you, or which one you'd introduce other people, which one you think would be more effective. Because now we have very different paths, so I'm very, very curious which one you agree with more.
Which one do you think would be best? Or if you had to pick just from games that are in both of these, would you mix and match in any way? Would you pick like a couple games from my list, a couple from Dylan's and mix and match? And more importantly, what would be on your list? If you had to introduce someone to Agricola and you could pick any other 4 games that you know of to get to that step, what would be the 4 games that you would select? And also let us know if you've seen our past video or previous video where we went from Carcassonne to a Feast for Odin. Let us know which format you preferred.
Yes,
obviously, this one that we did today gives us more variation, I think. Like, this is probably going to lead to us having different lists a little more because we're coming from different starting points. So I like that, but you know,
the other one is more, it has more entertainment because people can pick really tough games and say, how are you going to get from Forced Sale to Oath? And we're like,
and
I
it's
have
ridiculous,
no idea, right? So that one has more entertainment value. This one is probably more useful to people that actually potentially want to use these videos as a starting point. So yeah, let us know what you prefer, and we'll definitely listen to the feedback, and that'll shape how we do episode 3 and beyond.
Yeah, and if you want to have a say in which game we have as the end game or whatever, just know if you're a patron, you can vote. So if you are a patron already, keep an eye on your email, and whenever we do these polls, you'll get a notification asking you to help us out.
Yeah, otherwise, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.